Today we will talk about the sagittal section of the head. We have head of the horse here. Okay. We will talk about three main cavities or more than in the sagittal section. First of all, nasal cavity, oral cavity, pharyngeal cavity, laryngeal, and then cranial cavity. Okay. Nasal cavity, as you see, it's related to the respiratory system. Okay. Oral cavity occupied by the tongue. Okay. Pharyngeal, larynx or laryngeal cavity, and then cranial cavity, which is covered by occupied by the brain. Okay. First of all, I'm talking about the nasal cavity. Nasal cavities have boundaries, يعني walls. Okay. What's the boundaries of the nasal cavity? Here. It's better here. Okay. It consists from roof, which is nasal bone. Okay. And then floor consists from hard palate and caudally soft palate. Okay, so we have here roof and floor, cranially and caudal border. Roof consists from the nasal bone. Floor consists from two parts. Cranially, it's the hard palate, which is all these transverse ridges of the hard palate, and then soft palate, most caudally attached. Okay, then we have many of parts that occupied the nasal cavity. It consists or called concha. Okay, nasal concha. We have here dorsal nasal concha, ventral nasal concha, and here the first part, middle concha here, and the others here called ethmoid conchae. Ethmoid conchae, because it's many of concha. Okay, first we have dorsal concha, and then ventral concha, middle one, and ethmoid concha. Okay, again, this is the nasal cavity. Consists from the roof and the floor. Roof, it's represented by the nasal bone. Nasal bone، وهذا الجزء من عند الفرونتال bone. This is the frontal sinus. اللي هنا احنا عندنا بالإنسان. In human also here, the frontal sinus. Frontal sinus, the respiratory sinuses. Okay, this is the frontal sinus, frontal bone, and goes forward to the nasal bone. Okay, what about the floor? Floor consists from two parts, which is the hard palate and most caudally, which is the soft palate. Okay, hard palate, you can see here, consists from many of ridges, transverse ridges. Okay, in the middle you can see يعني الهارد palate consists from raphe, transverse or palatine raphe, and then transverse ridges from both sides, like palm tree, مثل شجرة النخيل. Okay, so the floor consists of hard palate, caudally the soft palate. Okay, occupied by many of conchas. First of all, dorsal and ventral concha, middle and ethmoid concha. Dorsal concha, it goes cranially, ending with straight fold. Straight fold, ending with a straight fold. تنتهي بطية straight يعني أمامية. Okay, straight fold. Then we have ventral concha, and it is consist from two folds. Alar fold, alar يعني جناح, like a wing. شوفوها. Alar fold and basal fold. between two folds there is a true nostrils اللي هو هذا. اوكي هذا البيزل وهذا الالر. تمام. in human this is the other fold. Okay, like wings, and then we have the basal fold. Then we have the true nostrils. تمام. حتى not forget. Okay, I am in the nasal cavity. تمام.
This is other fold.
This is the basal fold. This is the alar fold. Between the two folds, this is
True.
the true nostrils. The true nostrils هاي الفتحة الأمامية. Okay, we have two openings of nasal cavity. We have anterior and posterior. Anterior and posterior openings. We have two.
كانوا بولي راوته ميدل لازم.
middle هذا الجزء هذا الميدل اللي هو بين. Okay, and this is the ethmoidal concha. Okay, again لو تمام إن شاء الله. زين. Of course all these part أو خلي أشرح. النازل cavity consists from three parts. Okay, osseous part, cartilaginous part. Okay, the osseous part is represented by the nasal bone, and here the palatine bone, and we have here the vomer bone. الفومر بون. اوكي الفومر بون هذا يكون كاودلي. اوكي والجزء الكارتلج اتس covered هذا الجزء بقى هذا الكارتلج represented by the nasal septum. اذا موجود هنا جزء من اوكي هذا. اوكي احط لما مقطوع it's not cutted. هذا كل الجزء cartilage. Okay, this is the nasal septum. It separated the nasal cavity into the right and left. Okay, نجي بعد والممبرينس اللي هو هذا شرحنا. Okay, اللي هم represented by the concha. So we talked about the nasal cavity, the osseous part اللي هو dorsally nasal bone. ventrally حيكون palatine, hard palates, and then most dorsally اللي هو vomer bone. هنا ما موجود يعني ما تقدر تشوفه أوضح. Okay, this is the vomer bone. Okay, واضح لحد الآن. We talked also about the cartilaginous part, which is represented by the nasal septum. Also membranous related to the concha, and the cartilage here, the nasal septum, covered right with left, separating the nasal cavity right from the left. So now, any question about it? لا. طبعا هنا هذا الفومر وهذا الجزء حيكون الإثمويد. هنا it's not cutted. هنا حيكون متصل. Okay, يعني بالدايسكشن I didn't cut it. So this is the vomer bone part of it ويتصل مع الإثمويد bone. فحيكون لي جزء واحد. It's consisted from or forming a one part. Okay, so we have caudally here الإثمويد, caudodorsally الفومر بون, ventrally حيكون الهارد باليت, وهذا مو بون الهارد باليت بون أو البالاتاين بون. السوفت باليت مو بون لأنه it's muscular, and then we have dorsal border here in nasal bone. Between the dorsal concha and the ventral concha, we have many of metasis. We have many of metasis. اللي هي passage of air and for cooling and warming the air حسب season, okay, according to the season. So we have here metasis, many of metasis. Dorsal meatus between the nasal cavity bone, the nasal bone and the dorsal concha, and middle meatus between the two dorsal concha and ventral concha, and then we have ventral meatus between the floor, the hard palate, and the middle one. And ethmoid concha, it's have many of meatuses. It's called ethmoidal meatus. واضح؟ اوكي جماعة؟ زين شرحت. تمام. نجي. طبعا as I said we have two openings. عندنا inferior and posterior يعني أمامية وخلفية. اوكي posterior. inferior اللي هي هذه. اوكي this is one. اللي هي when between two folds. الألر fold and the basal fold. okay then we have هذه الفتحة تكون هنا بهالضبط هذه. هذا المكان. okay this is the posterior corona أو يسموها الكونة أو posterior nasal opening. posterior nasal opening الخلفية. posterior nasal opening or corona. okay so we have inferior openings and posterior openings at the end of the passage of the nasal cavity الممر كله. okay understood. الكونة الانفيرير nasal opening اللي هي النوسترلز قلت هنا يسموها الترو نوسترلز. ليش؟ لأنه هي تطلع على الخارج التنفس. okay and this is the passage of the cona أو the same. هنا covered with the nasal septum. هنا حتكون باهي. هذا الكونة. تمام. هذا الكونة. تمام. هذا أوضح لأنه هذه النازل septum cut. this is the cona. هذه. واضح؟ this is the posterior nasal opening and this is the inferior nasal opening. so حتى not forget أنا عندي زهايمر صاير. talked. طيب. yes. تمام. and then we have sinuses. نسيت واحدة. مع إني ما كاتبتها نسيتها. we have here this meatus. It's lead to opening of maxillary sinuses. okay maxillary sinuses. The opening of the maxillary sinuses. so we have here frontal sinus. هنا حيكون الماxillary sinus opening. this is lead to the opening of the maxillary sinus. Sphenopalatine sinus. هذا. okay so we have frontal sinus, maxillary sinus, sphenopalatine sinus. this one. okay frontal two parts. الفرونتال مقسم جزء cranial وكاودال. جزء caudal. this is the frontal sinus. this is lead to the maxillary sinus opening and this is the sphenopalatine sinuses. واضح هنا أحسن. هذا أوكي sphenopalatine sinus. هذا الفرونتال sinus. أوكي and this is lead to the الجزء هذا حيليد to the maxillary sinus اللي هو واضح هنا أكثر. تمام. شرحت على sinuses. أوكي muscles بقت تمام. هو النيزو maxillary. لا تنسوها هاي كلش مهمة اللي هي النيزو maxillary opening. نيزو maxillary opening. It's lead to the maxillary sinus. Again, sinus is very important. Frontal, 2 parts, cranial وcaudal. Maxillary sinus اللي هي high opening of the nasomaxillary sinus, and we have here على الكاركس هذه sphenopalatine sinus. سنجي على الأورال cavity لأنه تمام nasal cavity till now we have in okay. So we have here the oral cavity. After the nasal cavity, we have the oral cavity. The oral cavity, as you see here, it's occupied by tongue.